I'm Sayakat Cosplay and welcome to Learning to Use a Sewing Machine. This is the fourth part in my Learn to Sew with Sayakat series, and today is all about the sewing machine. So we've come to the big kahuna video of this series, learning to sew with a machine. The last video was all about hand sewing, and now I'm going to show you a lot of basics on how to use your machine, what parts are, things like that. First off, everyone's machine is going to be a little bit different. There's different makers and different models. Mine has a lot of bells and whistles, but it's a sewing machine, so all the things that I'm going to be showing you generally are going to be very similar to whatever machine you may have. So all sewing machines are going to be a bit different depending on the brand, but they all sew. So even though my machine has a lot of bells and whistles, it works exactly the same as whatever sewing machine you may have. In this video, I'm going to show you how to wind a bobbin, what the different parts of your machine are, how to thread your machine, how to load a bobbin, various basic intro techniques and stitches, and just what a sewing machine is and how it works in general. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on all the new awesome content. Alright, this is my machine. She is a Husqvarna Viking Topaz 50. She is about a year old, a little more than a year old, so she's a relatively new machine. Sewing machines can generally last for decades if they are well maintained, but I got a new one last year. So the basic parts of the machine are the machine, a power cable, and down at my feet here, a foot pedal. So those are the main things that are going to come with your machine that aren't your machine, is the power cord and the foot pedal. They plug in over there. Also, you can see I have a USB stick plugged into my machine. Not all machines are going to have a USB port, but newer ones might, especially one that is also an embroidery machine. This is a dual purpose machine. This is both a sewing machine and an embroidery machine. General parts of your machine: you have your needle here, your presser foot, the presser foot shank. You have your bobbin plate. This is the feed dog control. I have a digital machine, so this is the stitch and tension selector for my machine. This is the spool where my thread goes. This is my bobbin winder, and I have a little thread cutter over here. And I don't have a thread ripper on my foot shank because this machine has an automatic cutter. So my machine has a button and a cutter in the bobbin plate to do the cutting. My machine also has a nice little storage thingy in the back here, so I have feet and bobbins, and this guy lifts up for more storage, and it's really nice to have that there. So the first things I'm going to do is just show you how to change out a needle and to change out your presser foot. So on a lot of machines, they will have a little thing in the back here to release your presser foot, a little tab or a little pressure release. Mine is just a pressure, it's held in place by pressure. So this plastic, it allows me to just slide it in and back. That's particular to my machine. My old machine had a little release, but it's all very easy to change out your presser foot. Your needle is going to be a little bit more difficult to change. The one thing that I didn't mention on, going over the basics of the machine is the the needle shank control. The manual control is always on the side. It's going to be this big wheel, so I can lower the needle manually. On my machine, it has a little screw, and my machine came with a little screwdriver, and I just turn this little screw. I don't have to loosen it all the way. I don't have to take that whole thing out, but I loosen it a little bit. I'm gonna bring this back up, and the needle just fell out. Make sure to take the needle out and not make your machine move, otherwise you're gonna have a bad time. And the reason I need to change my needle is I was doing embroidery. This needle isn't dead yet, so I'm gonna keep it. If you've been sewing for a certain needle for about 8 to 10 hours, depending on the type of fabric that you are working with and what you're doing, you're gonna wanna change your needle out. If you're doing a heavy duty sewing day, about once a day. Needles will dull down pretty quickly. I'm going to change out for just a universal needle for working with lighter fabric, because I'm going to be working with a lighter flannel. So needles, machine needles have a rounded side and a flat side. On the machines that I have used, the flat side always goes to the back. It can be easier to load a needle without the foot there. The flat side goes to the back in the needle shank. Just stick it up and tighten the screw. All right, that is in. You can put your foot back on and your needle is changed. Okay, so what if you need a new bobbin? These are my bobbins. They are specific for the model of machine. Husqvarna has very specific bobbins. Make sure if you are buying new bobbins to check what bobbins you have that came with your machine. Different machines do take different bobbins. So the bobbins that I had for my old machine don't work in this one. So I had to buy all new bobbins. I mean, they're cheap, but make sure you always check what kind of bobbin you have in your machine. So I have an empty bobbin right here, and I'm going to show you how to wind a bobbin. Now I need to wind another bobbin for embroidery, which I'm not going to do right now, but I'm going to wind it so that I have it and have it ready to go. All right, now I need to wind the bobbin. So I'm going to stick my thread on the spindle. What's really cool about my machine is it can be up or down. I prefer it down. Make sure you snug that thread into the spindle. And I'm going to go around this piece here, this little guy here, and then through this guide. So this guides the thread around to the bobbin. My bobbins are only supposed to be wound in one orientation, which it has a little logo. I stick the thread through the little hole. Most bobbins will have a little hole, and put it down on the bobbin holder. In order for your machine to recognize that it needs to wind a bobbin, usually you have to push it over into the bobbin winding position. When I start winding my bobbins, I hold onto the thread to make sure that it is tensioning correctly for the first couple seconds, and away we go. All right, I'm gonna cut that excess thread off. You don't have to do this, but I like to do it because it keeps the bobbins nice and tidy. And my machine, I can press down the foot pedal, or I have a start-stop button. So I don't need to press the foot pedal. You might need to press the foot pedal to start your bobbin and keep your bobbin winding, but I'm just gonna press start-stop. When a bobbin is winding, you're probably gonna wanna watch it to make sure it's not making any errors in its winding. I've made the mistake of leaving it alone and coming back and finding a very sad bobbin. Or not paying attention and then I find a very sad bobbin. And it's gonna wind until it starts to hit this little stopper, at which point you'll hear it stop spinning, and then you just stop and your bobbin is bound. It's done. This takes a lot longer to wind with embroidery thread because the thread is very fine and thin than a more typical heavy duty thread, but it's fine. All right, I'm gonna put it back into the sewing position so that my machine knows the bobbin winding is done. Take it off, and I have a little cutter here, so I'm just gonna go yoink, and my bobbin is wound. Yay! Now to thread your machine. Hi. I'm gonna thread my machine with a red thread, so hopefully you can see it pretty easily. Okay, so your machine has multiple directions usually on the machine for how to thread your machine. So I have a thread guide here and another guide here and a little arrow that's telling me it needs to go here and then back up and then around. So this is the thread take up and thread guide, and this helps to tension your thread. So you need to thread it through there. So I'm going to take my thread, go around here, down. There's a little metal plate in here that I need to go to the left of. I'm going to go down, up. In here, there is a little hook. I don't know if you can see that from the angle that I'm at, but there's a little metal hook that it's going to go around and click through, down. Some machines will have a little guide here at the front of the machine. Mine has a guide on the top of the needle shank. Through the needle shank guide, and then through the needle. Some machines have a guide for threading your needle. Mine does. Mine has a little thing which helps me to thread the needle. I don't actually use it that much, but it has it. Some machines will automatically thread the needle. Those are really fancy machines, but I just like to thread manually. Just poke it through and then pull it through. And you have threaded your machine. You take a matching bobbin. If I can get it out. Come on. There we go. My bobbin goes in and then pulls through these little thread holders. And some machines you're going to need to pull the bobbin thread up. Mine doesn't need that. Mine will automatically pull the thread up for me. If you have a machine where you need to pull the bobbin thread up through the plate to get started, you're going to want to pull the bobbin thread out a couple inches and make sure you're holding onto the needle thread. Use your manual control to push the needle down and then pull that thread through. And your thread is now ready to go. I don't need to do that with my machine. I have a system that doesn't require that, but some machines you're going to need to pull the thread up. I also have a little automatic cutter in mine. Now, my machine has 250 different stitch settings. This is overkill. You don't need that many stitches. For the most part, you need 2 basic stitches when you are sewing, and mostly I use 2 basic stitches for cosplay, a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. Most machines are going to have this option. Unless you have a machine from the 1800s, which only will do straight stitch, you're going to have straight and zigzag stitches on your machine. You're going to go over to your stitch selector and select a straight stitch. Mine is digital, and mine is going to tell me the foot that I need to use and the needle that I'm going to need to use and the tension. It automatically tensions for me. If you don't have an automatic tensioner, you're going to need to check the tension for your fabric. So you're going to put your foot, I'm on a basic straight stitch. You're going to put your foot down. Mine is a digital up and down, so I'm going to use the buttons to put my foot up and down. So my foot goes down. Most machines will have a little thing behind the foot shank to flip it up and down. And when you start a line of stitching, you're going to want to reinforce that line of stitching, meaning you want to go back and forth a couple of times to reinforce that line of stitching. My machine also has a fix function where it will tie a knot at the beginning of the line of stitching. I also will go back and forth just to secure that line of stitching. So you go forward a couple stitches, backwards a couple stitches, and then forwards again. This way the stitching is reinforced and won't come out when you start your seam. The same thing when you end a seam, you want to make sure you back stitch and reinforce the end of a seam so it doesn't have any opportunity to fray or unravel. So I'm gonna go forward a couple more and then back up a couple stitches, go forward a couple stitches. My machine also has a stop function where it will tie a knot at the end of a row of stitching. Now, if this was a less fancy machine, I would pull the foot up and then cut the thread on the seam ripper on the back of the foot shank, but mine has an automatic cutter and it automatically cuts the thread for me. It's nice. Et voila, a nice straight stitch. So now I'm going to do a zigzag stitch. You go over to your stitch selector and select a zigzag, and it will automatically move the needle within the foot to tell me where the stitch is going to be starting, and it knows to move the needle back and forth instead of straight. So again, same thing that I did with the straight stitch. I'm going to secure the front or the start and the end of the stitching. Back it up and go forward. When I want to stop, I'm going to back it up, forward, stop, and cut my thread. And a nice zigzag line of stitching. Straight stitching you're going to want to use on non-stretch fabrics. Zigzag stitching is for stretchy fabrics. That stitch has stretch to it and won't break when you're stretching fabric as much as a straight stitch. So this is my stitch selector. It's digital. Not all machines are digital. Some have wheels for selecting things. So if it's not digital, it'll have a wheel for selecting the stitch and a wheel for selecting stitch width. And sometimes it'll also have tension knobs. Mine automatically calculates tension. So I can change the tension here. So this is the tension selector, but it automatically chooses tension for whatever fabric I've selected. So I put in woven medium. It tells me what needle I need. It automatically does the tension. This is the stitch height and stitch width. So I can change that pretty easily. Not all machines are this fancy, but you're going to be able to move your stitch width, stitch height, and tension on any machine. So depending on the machine, you're going to be able to change your tension, change your stitch width, change your stitch height, change your stitch. So selecting between different stitch styles, I can do all different kinds of stuff, but those are going to be universal on all machines. So you're gonna be able to change those parameters. The last thing I want to talk about real quick are your feed dogs. These are what advance fabric forward in your machine. The number of times I've had problems with feed dogs is a lot. These will go up and down with the motion of the needle. So as the needle goes down, the feed dogs go down, and as the needle comes up, the feed dogs come up, and then they also slightly move forward and back. So they'll move in a slightly circular motion. The feed dogs are also textured and are grippy to grip your fabric. You can change the height of your feed dogs. Usually there'll be a slider under the feed dogs. So I have my slider here, and I can put my feed dogs down or my feed dogs up. And they'll come back up when I advance the machine again. So now they're back up. So feed dogs, if you are having issues with feeding fabric in your machine, check your feed dogs to make sure that they are the correct height, that they're doing the things that you want to do correctly. My machine, the feed dog's height can be controlled on my control panel. So this lever is just either up or down, but then I can control how high they're up on my control panel. So always check your feed dogs. And yes, I know that's a weird name for something, but that's what they're called. I didn't name it. So that was sewing machine basics. I hope this video was helpful in your sewing journey, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.